Behind this, though, the truth was that 7-Eleven had reached a plateau, and not an overly high one. This became evident in the Tour de Trump early in the year when Andy Hempston, in ninth place, was the only 7-Eleven rider in the top 20, and the team itself finished sixth, behind such overachievers as AC Pinarello, Spago, and Subaru Montgomery. Other than the team time trial, no stage was won by 7-Eleven, which could boast of just a handful of almost. We came in as heavy favorites, and a lot of pressure was put on our shoulders, and sometimes we made a few tactical mistakes. Maybe we chased a little bit too hard, or we waited too long, said the thoughtful Ron Kiefel. This is bicycle racing, he continued. Sometimes you have the luck, sometimes everything falls your way, and sometimes you have little problems here and there, and they add up. The riders all denied they were disappointed, which is a sign of either hard-headed professionalism — some races you win, some you lose, but your confidence is unshaken — or weary indifference. Nothing had gone quite right in a year, and one more botched opportunity meant little. As usual, the truth was somewhere in between. What seemed obvious was that 7-Eleven lacked the attacking mindset that brought it victories in its earliest European appearances, starting with a stage victory in the Giro in 1985, a week after the riders turned professional. Over the years, 2 victories in the Tour of Switzerland, 1 in Giro, and 4 stage victories in the Tour de France added to the luster. The current lack of offense first became noticeable in the 1989 Tour, when the team was overly reactive rather than creative and daring. Gone were the hit-and-run tactics of early days. Replacing them was a stodgy establishment wait-and-see strategy. The Tour de Trump was crucial to 7-Eleven, which faced an uncertain future because its sponsor, the Southland Corporation, was sinking in a sea of junk bond debt. If it hoped to attract another corporate bankroller, the team needed good publicity. Speaking after the Trump race about forthcoming appearances in such major European races as the Giro and the Dauphiné Libéré, Finney admitted, "We have to win there or we're in trouble." Many observers would even have said big trouble. In fact, neither the Giro nor the Dauphiné went well for 7-Eleven. Basking now in its fine showing in the Tour time trial and with its leader in yellow, the team appeared to be on the rebound. Some people want to do good, but Moreno Argentin wants simply to do well, and he often has. In the decade since the Italian rider turned professional, he won the World Championship road race in 1986 and finished second the next year, won his country's national championship in 1983 and 1989, won the Tour of Lombardie in 1987, the Tour of Flanders in 1990, and Liège-Bastogne-Liège in 1985, 86, and 87. Otherwise, Argentin has bad luck. Let Greg LeMond tell about the World Championship of 1984 in Barcelona. He admitted later that he had something against me for the 83 Worlds when I won, LeMond said. I had dropped him, and he'd been taking a lot of bad press at home in Italy because he hadn't been able to stay with me. So the next year in Barcelona, he sat right on my wheel the whole race. Drafting, I meant that all race long, any move I made, he was right there on my wheel, never helped out by letting me draft off his wheel to save some energy. I ended up watching 20 guys jump away with no effort at all, just riding away from me because they were working together. And I had nobody except Argentin sitting behind me. What's wrong, I asked him. Why are you doing this? What have you got against me? He said something like, we're friends, but give me some money, $10,000, and I'll work for you. To be truthful, I knew at the time it was sarcasm, said only to get me even angrier. But I was so angry that I decided not to take it. When the race ended, I told the press he wanted money. He told me so. I wish now I'd never done it because the controversy hurt Argentin tremendously, but it also taught him not to fool around with me. He gave away the World Championship. He could have won that year as easily as I could have won if we'd worked together. It was very upsetting to me the way he acted, and I certainly upset him when I told about his demanding money. But at the time, I felt he deserved it. Italian journalists asked, Greg, why didn't you win? I said, Argentin sat on my wheel and then wanted $10,000 to race. Boy, did that raise a storm in Italy for him. That was just one bit of bad luck. A few years later, Argentin provoked the Tifosi, the superheated horde of Italian cycling fans, by moving to Monte Carlo to escape taxes at home. A couple of years after that, in a Tirreno-Adriatico race, he swung at a traffic officer who he felt was blocking his way and found himself accused of physically assaulting a policeman in the pursuit of his duties. As crimes go, it was surely not the most outrageous committed in Naples that day, but it was enough to make the headlines and stigmatize a rider who had never won many hearts. Now Argentin was popular again. The retirement of one major Italian bicycle star, Francesco Moser, and the decline of another one, Giuseppe Saroni, had something to do with it. Another factor was Argentin's new work ethic. Victory in the Tour of Flanders and fourth place in Milan-San Remo had lofted him atop the World Cup standings when the Tour began. A stage victory in the Tour of Switzerland a few weeks before had consolidated his position. Like so many of the Italian riders whose world is circumscribed by the Giro, he had never entered the Tour of France before. But then his sponsor, Aristea, a manufacturer of kitchen ceramics, decided in 1990 that publicity would help in the coming monetary union of Europe. Argentin admitted that he was not a candidate for the final yellow jersey. "I'm a realist," he says. "I know I'm a rider for the classics, not stage races." This third stage especially seemed right for him. 228 rolling kilometers from Poitiers to Nantes, the only climbing difficulty a fourth category hill 2/3 of the way along. On this rainy day, however, the trick was to reach the bitey hill, the Mont des Alouettes. The Tour was once again the target of protesters. From different meadows, those of the regions of Deux-Sèvres and the Vendée, where many pugnacious shepherds frolic, came the next band of demonstrators. Not for them the throwing of branches across the road and the spilling of oil to interrupt the race. These 24 farmers didn't plan merely to interrupt, but to end. Near the town of Saint-Gemme, 86 kilometers into the stage, 4 trees blocked the road, while burning bales of hay and piles of tires marked the barricades with dark smoke amid a heavy drizzle. Banners announced that the race was to be stopped to protest agricultural quotas and lamb imports. A way around the demonstration had to be found, and it was, guided at one point by a local youth on a bicycle as the Tour de France took to the back roads for 20 kilometers to skirt the protesters. With the pack grouped, the race was easily neutralized. The riders glided along with the same ease they showed daily between the ceremonial start and the real start, those few kilometers, that comfort zone where no attack is permitted and every man is allowed to dream lightly of triumph ahead. If the riders were no more than sulky, Bernard Hinault was angry. Everybody remembered how he had punched out at shipyard workers when they blocked the road in the 1984 Paris-Nice race. He raised sheep himself, Hinault said, or had somebody to do it for him, and so he was basically sympathetic to the demonstrators' anger. That did not diminish his outrage. 5,000 or 6,000 people have lost their chance to see the Tour go by, he said. Cycling is always exposed to this type of demonstration. Why? Simply because it's free. It's not like tennis or soccer, which never has this type of problem because the seat is too expensive to waste it in a protest. Other officials tried harder to conceal their chagrin. The Tour de France is vulnerable because it uses public roads and because it offers such good publicity to a disruption, said Jean-Marie Leblanc, the director of the race. He also noted the obvious, that one group of workers had interfered with another's right to work. It had been a stormy day, Leblanc said, figuratively and literally. Intermittent heavy rain had left the road slick, causing a series of crashes. Laurent Fignon was one of those who went down hard. 2 Spaniards fell right in front of me, and I couldn't avoid them, he reported. One of the Spaniards, Roque de la Cruz, of the Seur team, became the first rider to drop out of the Tour when he had to be taken to a hospital for his injuries. Fignon had also been slowed by a puncture in the early going and had to ride all out to make it back to the pack, where he finished in 169th place without losing time on the overall leaders. In Fignon, the Castorama team had a man nearly at the tail of the pack end, and in Christian Lavane, another nearly at the front. After a packed sprint finish, Lavane hurled his arms aloft in victory as he outlasted Urab of PDM and Olaf Ludwig of Panasonic. What Lavane didn't know was that Argentin had crossed the same line alone 2 minutes and 29 seconds earlier. It happens now and again. Why had Lavane celebrated? Because I didn't know Argentine was ahead. How could he not know? There are 200 riders. You can't know what everybody is doing. Nobody told me Argentine was up ahead of us. With 50 kilometers to go, the Italian went for it. He chose his spot carefully, about 50 kilometers before a feed zone, which he stormed through without wasting time to grab a musette or mule bag. Soon his lead was 1 minute 20 seconds and rose consistently while the rest of the pack slowed to grab and pack away their musettes of small sandwiches, pastries, and fruits. With 20 kilometers left, Argentin was 4 minutes ahead when he failed to handle a sloshy curve and crashed. Another piece of bad luck. But he was back on his bicycle quickly and strong enough to keep most of his lead. While many of the sprinters were preparing to kick into overdrive, Argentan was having his wounds bandaged and preparing to accept the ritual victory bouquet wrapped in cellophane. "A pretty tough day," Levin was asked. "Let's see," he replied. "There was Fignon's crash, the rain, and the demonstration. I think that makes a tough day for anybody." In a celebrated obituary in 1989, La Gazzetta dello Sport pronounced Italian cycling dead. All the vital signs were missing, said the Italian paper, pointing to the few and unimportant races that its country's professional riders had won in recent years. Finding no trace of breath, La Gazzetta removed the mirror from the corpse's lips, shrugged, and walked away in sorrow. La Gazzetta is to Italian cycling what Brooks Brothers is to seersucker suits, a defender of the faith. But this time it got it wrong. Early in the 1990 season, as in a scary movie, the body began stirring, the eyelids began flickering, and color returned to the cheeks. What was this talk of rigor mortis when Gianni Bugno opened the World Cup season with a victory in Milan-San Remo, when Claudio Chiappucci won the mountain climbing jersey in Paris-Nice, when Moreno Argentan won the Tour of Flanders, when Argentan jumped to the top of the World Cup standings, and when Marco Giovannetti won the Vuelta d'España, the world's third-ranked stage race? Certo, the days of Francesco Moser and Giuseppe Saroni are over. Roberto Vincentini rides now for a minor team and rarely, if ever, crosses the border to compete. The sensitive Maurizio Fondries appeared unable to regain the form and luck that made him world champion in 1988. Flavio Giappuni was evidently a flash in the pan, and his second place to Laurent Fignon in the 1989 Giro d'Italia may be the high point of his career. But the Italian Renaissance was in full sway. As the 1990 Giro proved, Bugno won the prologue and held the pink jersey for the rest of the race, becoming the second rider in modern times after Eddie Merckx to have led the Giro from wire to wire. He excelled in the mountains and in the time trials. For the first time in years, the Tifosi heard their hearts sing. The music was, of course, by Mozart. Somewhere between the composer's Hafner Symphony and his Jupiter, Bugno learned, allegro vivace, how to become a champion. Given a month of musical therapy to cure vertigo, Bugno blossomed from a timid rider who seemed able to win only small races into the man who led the computerized ranking of the world's top 600 professionals. One of his undetected problems was vertigo, or dizziness and fear of falling when he descended from a mountain peak at high speed. Bugno finally bared the secret after he was first over the top in the 1989 Milan-Turin Classic, but was easily caught by the pack on the descent. "A priest in a soutane could have made it down faster than I did," Bugno admitted. "I felt so dizzy that I slowed down almost to a stop." The trouble was laid to a bad crash in the 1988 Giro and to a congenital obstruction in the canals of his inner ear. As a cure, Bugno tried ultrasound treatments laced with music. "I listened to Mozart at different speeds and degrees of loudness for a month," he said. "After that, the vertigo was gone." Then he visited an allergist who discovered that he could not tolerate wheat, milk, and milk products. A combination of pills was prescribed, and his diet was changed. Afterward, he was put into the hands of Claudio Corti, a veteran Italian rider who taught Bugno how to take charge of his Chateau d'Ax team. Finally, he began seeing a psychologist who helped resolve Bugno's reluctance. This problem was traced to his childhood, which he spent with his grandparents in Italy while his parents worked in Switzerland. Bugno was born in Brick, Switzerland, where his father was a carpenter. All this took place in the 1989-90 off-season. The rider who had won only the minor Tour of Calabria in 1988, the Tour of the Apennines in 1986, 87, and 88, and the semi-classic Tour of Piedmont in 1986, suddenly was storming down the Poggio Hill to win Milan-San Remo while other riders took the descent more prudently and slowly. His victory in the Giro was just as impressive, while Bugno finishing first by 6 minutes and 33 seconds. Even so, many Italians advised him to skip the Tour de France, reasoning that he had nothing further to prove and that his chances were slim. No Italian has won the Tour since 1965. "The Italians just aren't used to such a hard race," judged Bernard Thévenet, who won the Tour de France twice in the 1970s. "And coming a month after the Giro, the Tour is just too much for most riders who went all out in Italy." Bugno knew that. He had finished 68th in 1988 and 11th the next year. But, as he said, the Tour de France is the summit of cycling. More fans than any other race, more reporters, more pressure. I still have a lot to learn, but if I didn't feel I have a role to play, I wouldn't be here. "I think I'm going to get some new respect," he added, and he might have been speaking for all Italian riders. Hold the embalming fluid, La Gazzetta dello Sport. Even such a vast and imposing event as the Tour de France still has occasional room in its heart for the personal touch. Better, the personal touch with tradition behind it. About 70 kilometers from the finish of the fourth stage, just outside the town of Bédy in Brittany, the pack allowed Gerard Rouet to go off ahead, alone. Ordinarily, Rouet, a teammate of Laurent Fignon's with Castorama and the winner of the Midi Libre stage race just a month before, would have raided a counterattacker or two. Domestics from the other French teams who would ride his wheel and make sure that he was not slipping off to try to steal a victory. This time, though, the pace remained moderate. The explanation was that Rouet was the regional, as the local hero is called. He came from Bédy, and his parents still lived there. They would be waiting with assorted cousins, uncles, and aunts up the road to welcome Rouet back home. The tradition of the bon de sortie, or permission for a rider to leave, is many decades old in the Tour and touching. In its small way, it manages to say that the riders are not heroes isolated from their roots, but still part of the fabric of small-town France. The Tour works hard to keep its reputation as a fête populaire, or people's party. Each morning, in the half hour or so between the beginning of the ritual sign-in and the start, riders and their public meet. Old men turn up in racing jersey of teams long extinct to glide on their bicycles among the riders and mimic, but never, even to the coldest eye, parody the sport of youth. The police are lenient about letting children pass through the barriers and seek autographs. The time passes quickly with a word with a rider here, a good luck whisper to an idol there. It means nothing and is never forgotten. So Rouet played out his part in the ceremony, shaking hands, exchanging kisses on first this cheek, then that, then again on each for the maximum of 4 kisses that the French reserve for family and closest friends. A few banalities were exchanged, too. "All goes well, Gerard?" his mother asked. He assured her that it did. "All goes well?" his father asked, and he was reassured in turn. All began to go less well as the pack neared, and Gilles de Leon popped off the front and sped away. A Frenchman with the Helvetia team based in Switzerland, de Leon was emphatically not a regional. Since he was born hundreds of miles from Brittany and Saint-Étienne and has lived most of his life even further east in Chambéry in the Alps. In short, he had not been granted a bon de sortie. He was attacking, and now the pack was forced to react. He's young, ambitious, and courtishly rapid, not the sort of rider to be allowed much leeway. De Leon apologized later for his breach of pack etiquette, explaining that he had not known a regional was up ahead visiting his family. With a smile, Rouet got back on his bicycle, waited for the pack, and then pedaled off to join the chase. The last 60 kilometers of the 203-kilometer stage were raced at high speed, with one attacker after another allowed his head for a while and then caught. 15 kilometers from the finish, everybody was together and riding fast. 4 kilometers further along, disaster. Suddenly the road narrowed because large bales of hay had been placed to block riders from taking a wrong turn or a shortcut at a traffic circle. Possibly the bales had been pushed even more into the road by the spectators behind them. Riders who had been 3 and 4 abreast bumped shoulders while keeping their bicycles inches apart, had to funnel into a stretch where not more than 2 and perhaps only 1 might pass. The leaders got through in a steady flow, but behind them the pace had to slacken and the long line of the pack grew longer still. There were some crashes, with riders down on the ground. Others managed to keep their balance, although they had to stop and wait for those ahead to move through the bottleneck. "If you want to avoid crashes, the place to be is up front," Greg LeMond said later, restating an old truth. Then again, LeMond was up front. Less lucky were some of the other favorites, such as Laurent Fignon, Giano Bugni, and Pedro Delgado. "I committed the error of letting myself drift to the tail end of the pack," Bugno admitted. "I wasn't vigilant, that's all." He had enough luck to find a few teammates near him, and they began laboriously working their way back toward the front, moving one small group of riders to the next group ahead. Delgado latched on, and 3 kilometers from the finish, they finally were within sight of the leaders. Straining over their handlebars, trying to fight the gusty winds, the riders would have agreed. On the causeway, Olaf Ludwig of Panasonic, a fine East German sprinter, spotted the big red Coca-Cola van that is usually parked at the finish to supply well-televised drinks to the riders. Ludwig jumped for what he mistook for the finish, taking with him such other sprinters as Eric van der Eerden of Buckler, Hugh Rabb of PDM, and Davis Finney of 7-Eleven. "We cursed when we realized the finish was still 500 meters away," Finney said. Gel Nijim of Buckler then made his move, but was passed by Johan Museeuw of Lotto, who held off Guido Bontempi of Carrera and a resurgent Ludwig and Finney. Last in the first pack of 50 riders to finish in the same time as Museeuw was Steve Bauer, who kept the yellow jersey and gained time on his closest rivals. Le Mans was 40th in the group of 50, gaining 7 seconds on Raul Alcala and Stephen Roach, who were unable to bridge when the pack split just in front of them along the causeway. Bigger losers were Buño and Delgado, 21 seconds back in the third group, and the biggest of all the favorites was Fignon, 44 seconds behind in 140th place for the stage. The man who had lost the Tour de France by 8 seconds the year before knew far too well how important 44 seconds could be. There was more rain ahead, 7 hours of heavy and steady rain when the Tour passed its longest day, 301 kilometers from Avranches to Rouen. By coincidence, it was July 4, and Normandy, with its many memorials to D-Day and the battles of World War II, seemed the perfect spot to celebrate the holiday. The holiday mood didn't last long. At kilometer 35, as the road turned away from the English Channel at Granville, Henri Manders of the Helvetia team attacked. He was quickly joined by Bruno Cornier of Z, Jean-Claude Coletti of RMO, Patrick Tolhoek of Buckler, Giancarlo Perini of Carrera, Dag Otto Lorentzen of 7-Eleven, and Jesper Skibby of TVM. With the wind at their backs, they soon built a lead approaching 6 minutes. To some teams in the pack, it must have felt like deja vu of the first stage all over again, and the chase began. At high speed, with many a crash in its wake, the pursuit continued for an hour. Later, members of the Castorama team admitted they had known what was coming. "You didn't have to be very smart to guess it," said Thierry Marie. He should have been in a holiday mood, too, since the race had passed close enough to his home to allow him to become one of the day's regionals and to greet his family and friends. Marie, though, was wan. For Laurent to feel better, the weather had to be good, the stage had to be short, and the riders had to set a moderate pace. Instead, it rained. The stage was 300 kilometers long, and everybody rode like crazy. And so, nearing Saint-Lô at kilometer 90, Laurent Fignon drifted over to his team car and said simply to his coach, Cyril Guimard, "I'm stopping here in the feed zone." 20 kilometers ahead, Guimard answered tersely, "Warn the boys." 3/4 of an hour later, at Villers-Bocage, as the rain continued to pelt down, Fignon slowed, turned his bicycle around, and left the Tour. He found the Castorama team car, climbed in, and was driven to the Knights Hotel in Rouen. Teammate Vincent Barteau was another regional. At Boulogne-Grenville, 2 kilometers from his home near Caen, he had stopped to be welcomed by his father, his wife, their 2 children, and a handful of his friends. This was at kilometer 163, an hour after Fignon quit, and Barteau went unhappily through the ritual. "Laurent told me yesterday that his calf was hurting. I didn't think this morning that he would be going far. He was in pain. His morale was shot. It was raining, and we had 300 kilometers to cover. And so once again, Fignon had to quit the Tour. This marked the 3rd time after 1986 and 1988. Of all the jinxes that bedeviled Fignon, the strangest seemed to be that he could not finish a Tour that moved clockwise around the country. When he won in 1983 and 1984, the direction was counterclockwise. The news of his setting foot to ground and delivering his dossard number to the officials spread quickly through the pack. Minutes later, just after the feed zone, the 7 breakaways were caught and the tempo slowed. Not until kilometer 206 near Lisieux was there another attack, with Gerrit Solleveld of the Buckler team off to take his chances. He got as far as 9 minutes and 30 seconds ahead before the pack awakened and whittled 5 minutes away. The Dutchman was an easy winner of the stage, but the headlines belonged to Fignon. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts concerning Laurent Fignon: those who don't like him, those who don't like him but are willing to overlook their feelings as long as he wins, and those who don't like him but are willing to overlook their feelings as long as he loses. The third group is by far the largest, and reached cult proportions when Greg LeMond made up a 50-second deficit and defeated Fignon by 8 seconds to win the 1989 Tour on its final day. "You should see the mail I received, all the nice things people had to say," Fignon reported. Even President Francois Mitterrand, a keen follower of bicycle racing, sent a letter of condolence, the contents of which Fignon refused to divulge. The headline on a provincial French newspaper in April said it all: "Fignon alone against everybody." Although the paper was talking about the Paris-Roubaix race, its headline summed up the complex rider who was a national hero after he first won the Tour de France in 1983 and an embarrassment after he won it again in 1984. Since then, he has only strengthened his reputation as a man respected but not admired, a rider who battles friend and foe alike. By attacking a teammate, Thierry Marey, to win the Tour of Holland over him by 1 second in the summer of 1989, Fignon squandered the sympathy he had generated a month before on the Champs-Élysées. The script was familiar. The year before, he had attacked another teammate, Gerard Rouet, to edge him for victory in the Tour of the European Community. "I like to win," Fignon often says. "I'm a winner." Piling it on a few weeks after the Tour of Holland, Fignon attacked another rider on the French national team, Thierry Claverelat, in the World Championship road race, enabling Le Mans to win. Was Fignon repentant? Not at all. Does he deign to admit a mistake? Never. After he proved positive in a drug test in the 1989 World Cup team time trial, Fignon refused any explanation except to say that laboratories were not infallible. "The charges don't touch me personally," he said. "I prefer to disregard them." His attitude, the French say with a shrug. The problem has always been his attitude. In 1983, it was still marginally acceptable for Fignon to celebrate his first victory in the Tour by trading in his Renault car. "Everybody drives one of these," he said with a sniff, to the disapproval of both a public that couldn't afford his model and one of his team sponsor, the same Renault, for a Ferrari. "I always promise myself one. I like speed." Treading the same borderline, Fignon spent the winter at a long round of nightclub appearances. Le Tout Paris, the swells of the capital, had embraced the young man with blonde bangs, granny glasses, and the reputation of being professional bicycling's intellectual on the basis of a year in veterinary college and an appetite for Stephen King novels. Did Eddie Merckx, the self-appointed keeper of the sacred flame of the sports tradition of asceticism, complain that Fignon was a playboy? "Merckx? Who's he?" Fignon retorted. "I don't know any Merckx." Fignon was only 23 years old, people said in his defense. He had been little more than an unproven support rider until the Renault team's leader, Bernard Hinault, developed knee tendonitis and had to sit out the 1983 Tour, opening the door for his teammate. In his unexpected glory, Fignon was entitled to mouth off, especially against Merckx, who was, after all, a Belgian. Frenchmen are always contemptuous of Belgians. The next year, after he dominated the Tour and crushed Hinault, now riding for La Vie Claire, Fignon went too far. This time he mocked a fellow Frenchman. In a brash attempt to win the Tour, Hinault attacked during the climb to Alpe d'Huez and was easily overtaken and passed by Fignon, who later said, "When Hinault took off, he made me laugh." The quote is still thrown in his face by reporters who might have had little good to say about Hinault personally, but could not bear to see a hero of the sport ridiculed. As he grew older, Fignon's few defenders found other explanations for his coldness. One was the death of his closest and nearly only friend in the pack, Pasquale Jules, in a car crash in 1987. Afterward, when he was asked about complaints that his teammates didn't know him and were unable to get close to him, Fignon snapped, "They're paid to ride for me, not to be my friends." Another explanation was his realization that he was not Superman, as he seemed to be when he won the 1984 Tour by more than 11 minutes, but just another vulnerable body in a dangerous sport. He developed tendonitis in his left heel in 1985, and despite sporadic successes, did not really make it all the way back until 1988. Revealingly, after Le Mans was shot and nearly killed in a hunting accident in 1987, Fignon was the only European rider who sent him a message of condolence. So he is capable of sensitive gestures as well as arrogant ones. But the arrogant ones are plentiful. In the 1989 Giro d'Italia, Fignon turned his head so often whenever press photographers appeared that they complained that they had nothing to show of him except his ponytail. In the 1989 Tour, he was awarded the Prix Citron, the Lemon Prize, by photographers for his lack of cooperation. He rarely grants interviews, and if they are held in his home in Paris, he charges for the privilege. As one of the very few French stars in professional cycling, he is under intense pressure. But the evidence has mounted that the real explanation for Fignon's behavior is that he's a bore. In the spring of 1990, he recorded two important victories that said much about him and his career. A week after he finished first in the Criterium International, he won a court case brought by a television cameraman who charged that a kick in the stomach from Fignon had caused a rupture. The evidence supporting the cameraman's claim was not overwhelming, a judge ruled. Neither triumph changed Fignon's public behavior. or the self-defensive way he has spoken since that fateful last stage of the 1989 Tour. True, Le Mans won the Tour and the World Championship road race that year, but Fignon remained unimpressed. It was my year, he insisted, citing his victories in the Giro, Milan-San Remo, the Tour of Holland, and the Grand Prix des Nations, his second place in the Tour de France, fourth place in the Tour of Romandie, sixth place in the World Championship, and seventh place in Liège-Bastogne-Liège. In FICP points, he overhauled Sean Kelly and Charlie Motet and moved briefly into first place in the computerized ranking of the world's best 600 professionals. Where does Le Mans rank? He asked rhetorically. Fifth then. In consistency, Fignon was also impressive. Le Mans crammed his season into 2 dazzling months, but Fignon's top showings extended from the opening classic of Milan-San Remo in March to the Grand Prix des Nations in October. All of this Fignon carefully recited. Everybody says that Le Mans was the rider of the year, and that irritates me, he complained to L'Equipe. He's a very good racer, very difficult to beat. But he put it together for only 2 months, and I did it all year long. The rider of the year, and I say it without false modesty, wasn't him. Starting in March, I won a big race every month except April. For anybody, that's a really exceptional season. Convinced? Neither were the French. Of the 195 riders left in the Tour, only Eddie Placard refused to fly the next day on a chartered jet covering the 585 kilometers from Deauville in Normandy to Sarrebourg in Lorraine. Like the team mechanics, journalists, and officials who followed the race in cars, Placard drove the distance, surrendering to his fear of flying. It was a boring trip across the north of France, the Belgian reported later, but better 5 or 6 hours of boredom than the cold sweat and terrible dizziness he had known the 2 times in his life he had been in a plane. He missed little aboard the jet, except a chance to participate in what had become the popular game of estimating Steve Bauer's chances of keeping the yellow jersey. The riders were badly split, but few gave Bauer better than a 50-50 outlook. Bernard Hinault and the Cyril Guimard were less sanguine. Each said 30%. If he didn't have those 10 minutes, I'd give him no chance, Guimard said. But 10 minutes, that's an awful lot to take back. Anyway, I give Le Mans 50%. More and more people were favoring Le Mans now, despite the 10 minutes. Le Mans himself refused to discuss either his own or Bauer's chances. But the Canadian was not as reticent. For all his brave talk, he admitted that he was not underestimating his neighbor, former teammate and training partner. You know, he joked after the Futuroscope breakaway, 10 minutes between Greg and me, that's a lot. But 10 minutes between me and Greg, that's not so much. Now, nearly a week later, he looked seriously at his chances. I can't give you a number, he said, but if I didn't believe in myself to the maximum, I wouldn't have any chance. I've got to believe. Last year in the last time trial, everybody gave Fignon 90% and Le Mans 10. Only Le Mans gave himself a 100% chance to win. The next day on the 6th stage, 202.5 kilometers from Sarenburg to Vittel in the Vosges region, tempers were so frayed that Eric von Lacker, the winner of the Liège-Bastogne-Liège, lost his self-control and cursed and then tried to punch a Colombian, Martin Fafin, who seemed to be in the middle of many pileups. The Colombians had long been ridiculed for their clumsiness, but a new target was the Soviet team that competed for Alpha Lum. They don't know anything. They still ride as if they're amateurs, complained Laurent Biondi of Histor Sigma. Scorn was directed equally at the erratically driven Alpha Lum team car, which had bumped Luc Leblanc, a French rider, on the way to Rouen. When Leblanc went down, he caused a dozen other riders to crash too. Among them was Moreno Argentin, who was so badly hurt that he had not started the stage to Vittel. Beset by strong winds and intermittent rain, the pack had 2 more crashes, one of them putting Ronan Pensac on the road. It would be pretty dumb to lose everything because of a crash, he said ruefully, as his minor injuries were treated. At the finish, it was time for the sprinters, and 5 of the best fought it out before Gel Nijim of Buckler edged Jesper Skibby of TVM and Johan Museau of Lotto. More meaningfully, a bit of history was made on the second and last small hill of the stage, when Dmitry Konachev of Alpha Lum passed first over the fly hill. He gained 5 points toward the best climber's jersey and moved ahead of Claudio Chiappucci, 33 points to 30 in the standings. For the first time in the history of the Tour de France, a Russian was in a leader's jersey. On paper, Greg LeMond was the overwhelming favorite in the 61.5-kilometer time trial over rolling country between Vittel and Epinal. Nobody could forget the first and similar time trial the year before, 73 kilometers from Dinard to Rennes in Brittany, where LeMond unveiled his triathlete handlebars and stormed to a 24-second victory to show that at last, more than 2 years before he lay bleeding nearly to death, he was back among the premier riders. That was all down on paper, but the Epinal time trial was ridden on the road. Moreover, on a road that was dry for most of the field and treacherously wet for the leaders, who set off at the end in reverse order of standing. A cold and overcast day predictably turned to rain on the seventh stage. All was well at the first timing, kilometer 20, where the American recorded 24 minutes and 45 seconds. That translated into the fastest clocking so far, 12 seconds ahead of the previous best set by Miguel Indurain of the Benestro team. The Basque had maintained his pace and led those riders already finished, including Giano Buño, who was down 23 seconds, and Delgado down 41 seconds. When he heard his time, LeMond was pleased. He was following the same strategy he had used in Rennes. I paced myself to go faster at the end. It made sense until the moment that Alcala passed the same checkpoint and was timed in 24 minutes flat. From then on, it was better to throw away the paper left from the year before. LeMond rode strongly, but kept losing time to Indurain, Buño, and Delgado. Alcala rode far more strongly and kept gaining time on the leaders. At the 41-kilometer checkpoint, LeMond was only the ninth fastest so far, 2 minutes behind Indurain, while the Mexican was 1 minute and 22 seconds ahead of the leader. At the halfway point, I was told that I was only 1.5 minutes ahead of the others, Alcala said. I knew then that I had the stage won. I didn't take any risks after that. I didn't want to crash. He and LeMond were cautious on the descent into Epinal, taking the 7 tight and wet turns more slowly than those who rode on dry roads. At the finish, Alcala had a comfortable lead of 1 minute and 24 seconds on Indurain in second place. Third was Buño, who was beginning to show his Giro form. LeMond was fifth, 2 minutes and 11 seconds back. If he was disappointed, he refused to admit it. I feel I was second on the stage because Indurain and the others rode on dry roads, he insisted. Of all the guys who had to ride in the rain, only Alcala beat me. LeMond admitted that he was not surprised to be beaten by the Mexican. What did surprise him, he continued, was that Pensac had labored in only 15 seconds behind him. Bauer had done well, too, finishing 14th or 2 minutes and 43 seconds behind Alcala. But Pensac, never a time trialer, had halved the Canadian's lead by finishing 7th, 2 minutes and 26 seconds behind. The Frenchman, who left 2 minutes ahead of Bauer, had expected to be overtaken and asked Z's assistant directeur sportif, Serge Boucherie, to blow the horn of his team car when Bauer approached. He kept listening, Pensac related, and the horn never blew. Chiappucci had done well, too, finishing 15th, losing just 6 seconds to Bauer. The mountains were still a couple of days away, and already the battle for the yellow jersey was on. All three leaders found something reassuring in their performances in the time trial. Chiappucci, in Rennes, I lost 5 minutes to Bauer, and here just 6 seconds. I've really made progress. Today, I think I can say that I win this tour. I think I can take the yellow jersey any day now. Ronan Pensac celebrated his 27th birthday with as pretty a present as the Tour de France can offer. The Frenchman received the yellow jersey. It's a nice gift for sure, he said, as he stood on the victory podium after the 118.5-kilometer climb from Geneva to Saint-Gervais-Mont-Blanc and slipped into the jersey. He looked dapper for someone who usually dresses in the rocker mode, verging on punk, and is so cool that he wore his sunglasses atop his head during a 10th stage ridden in strong sun and blustery winds. Climbing strongly as the tour began its stay in the Alps, Pensac easily replaced Steve Bauer in the overall lead. With his triumph and the 10-minute lead over most favorites that he gained at Futuroscope, Pensac established himself as a strong contender for the final victory. That, of course, was also what people had said about Bauer. Pensac had a little help from his friends on the way to his birthday party. The Z team kept the pace high up to the final 8-kilometer assault of the Betex ski resort on Mont Blanc. Up to that point, Bauer had managed to hang on in a large group of riders, including Pensac. But with 6 kilometers left, Pedro Delgado attacked twice, carrying with him most of his favorites, including Raul Alcala and Pensac. Stay with Alcala and don't worry about Bauer. He's cooked, Greg LeMond had advised Pensac early in the final climb. LeMond had it right. After falling behind in the first of three peaks, the Canadian made up his deficit on the descent and stayed with the favorites group on the second climb. By the third and final mountain, he could no longer respond. When Delgado and Pensac attacked, I simply couldn't stay with them, Bauer reported. I thought it better to climb at my own pace and lose the time than to try to stay with them and explode. His own pace proved far too slow. Pensac's lead on the climb jumped from 7 seconds to 28 in 2 kilometers and to 45 seconds in another kilometer. At the finish, Pensac had far overcome his 17-second deficit at the start, crossing the line 1 minute and 38 seconds ahead of Bauer, who fell to third place overall, 1 minute and 21 seconds behind. Second, 50 seconds behind Pensac, was Claudio Chiappucci. Bauer was disappointed and relieved at the same time. Finally, the pressure was off. "I've accomplished more than I ever hoped for," he said. 10 days in the yellow jersey is really something, the best thing in my life." Trying to sound upbeat, Bauer added that he had at least remained on the three-man victory podium. "Let me finish second in the Tour, and I'll be happy." Le Mans found himself in the unenviable position of having to defend his teammate rather than going off on his own behalf. While that opportunity might yet present itself if Pensac faltered, for now Le Mans, the world champion and defending Tour de France champion, was simply number 2 on the team. He knew that feeling all too well. Back in 1985, Le Mans was taught an inspiring lesson in team discipline. Bernard Hinault, then the leader of Le Mans' La Vie Claire team, crashed heavily in the final 250 meters of the finish in Saint-Étienne, just before the Tour entered the Pyrenees. Rushed to a hospital to repair his wounds, Hinault announced, "I still have my 2 arms and my 2 legs, and I'm far from being dead." Still, he had trouble breathing, and on the climb to Luz-Ardiden a few days later, Hinault dropped a couple of minutes behind Le Mans. Those minutes were enough to put the American in the yellow jersey on the road, the fanciful land where ambition flowers. Scenting the real yellow jersey, Le Mans pushed ahead with Stephen Roche, a rival, until the Vie Claire team car drew alongside and ordered him to help Hinault by refusing to relay Roche. "So I didn't attack," he recalled, "just rode Roche's wheel while he rested and coasted, and I didn't make a move. Luis Herrera caught us and took off, but still I held back, under team orders. Had I just gone with Herrera and followed him, it would have been enough to win that Tour de France for me. I could have won my first Tour de France that day. They told me Hinault was right behind me, and even without my working with Roche, I gained a minute. From the bottom of the hill to the top, we could have taken 3 or 4 minutes out of Hinault. I coasted up that last hill. I completely stopped, and he was still 1 minute 13 seconds down." Near tears and furious at the end of the stage, Le Mans denounced La Vie Claire officials until he was called in for a talk. When he emerged from the high-level meeting, he was calmer. "I got a little carried away," he confessed, explaining that when he said, "This was my chance to wear the yellow jersey," he really meant only for 1 day before helping Hinault reclaim it. The dispute was smoothed over. Hinault went on to win his 5th Tour, and Le Mans finished second, consoled by Hinault's public pledge to help the American win the next year. All would have been well except that Hinault was unable to honor his pledge. Once the 1986 Tour started, Hinault went for the victory, not to set a record, for Hinault is sincerely uninterested in records, but because his character prevented him from not trying to win. He attacked Le Mans on the road and in the press, waging physical and psychological warfare. Conciliatory with the French press, Le Mans was blunt with an American journalist to whom he denounced Hinault late in the Tour. "He made promises to me he never intended to keep. He made them just to relieve the pressure on himself. I just wish he had said it at the beginning of the Tour. It's each one for himself, but he didn't, and so I rode one kind of race. If he'd said it's every man for himself, I'd have ridden differently. I have bitter feelings about him." With no thanks to Hinault, Le Mans did win the '86 Tour. It was another unsparing lesson in team discipline. Now Le Mans had a chance to show what he had learned. First, he demonstrated that he was willing to work for Pensac by advising him to stay with Alcala and disregard Bauer. When it came to tactics, Le Mans was a good man to have on your side. Second, he was gracious to Pensac personally. "It's terrific for Ronan," he explained at the team's hotel. "It was also terrific for him," Le Mans explained. "Tactically, we're in a perfect situation. All I have to do is watch Delgado, Buño, and Alcala. If that helps Ronan win the Tour, fine. I'm paid by Z, and all we want is that a Z rider should be in the yellow jersey in Paris. If that's Ronan, swell." At his side, Pensac was exuberant. "Pressure?" he joked. "What pressure? I've had the yellow jersey for a couple of hours now, and I don't feel any pressure. The Z-Team sponsor, Raja Zenier, was also celebrating a birthday, his 44th, and he was ordering champagne for everyone. The next night, Zenier would scandalize traditionalists by being seen dancing in a discotheque while wearing the yellow jersey that Pensac had given him. There was a bond between them, Pensac explained. At the end of last year, he told me that I had given him one good year out of 3 in the Tour. That made me think, I ride for myself, but I couldn't deny that the Tour is the most important race in the year for the team. So I worked at being ready for this race. What people sometimes forget about Pensac was that he might dress like a punk, wear his black hair in spikes, and collect vintage cars and motorcycles, but he was a serious young man who had grown up and raised his younger sister as an orphan after their parents were killed in a car crash. I learned young to live life, he says. Whatever Pensac was, he was no fool. Listen, he said, you're not going to see me announce to the world tonight that Ronan Pensac is going to win the Tour de France. All I know is that I'm going to climb Alpe d'Huez in yellow. For the day, at least, the French had found themselves a hero. You wouldn't be wrong in considering him a super rider, gushed Hinault in his column in L'Equipe. He also fielded carefully a reader's question about how the Z-Team should carry on. Should it work for Pensac instead of Le Mans? Not at all, insisted Hinault. I think it's more intelligent to preserve the chances of both leaders for the simple and good reason that the other favorites are now obliged to attack.